Hello, good afternoon. I'm Sandra Maxon, a member of the Board of Directors for the Victoria Festival of Authors. Welcome to Maskotēw-askiy, a celebration of Prairie Poetics, featuring authors Brandi Bird, Samantha Martin-Bird, and Emily Riddle. Although we are gathered virtually, the Victoria Festival of Authors is located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators of these lands, and give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We are committed to serving as learners and listeners. If you are joining us from outside of Lekwungen territory, please feel free to share your own territorial acknowledgement in the Q&A. Thank you to our sponsors, the BC Arts Council, Canada Council of the Arts, the CRD, the Government of British Columbia, the United Way of Greater Victoria, Munro's Books, and the Writers' Union of Canada. This event and all VFA events offers closed captioning. Please click the double C at the bottom of your screen to view captions if you wish. If you have questions for us or for the authors during the event, please pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The moderator will be able to get to some of these questions near the end of the panel. This panel is curated and moderated by Samantha Knock. Sam is an Apatikosan poet, writer, and beadworker. Her family is originally from Isle Lacrosse, Saskatchewan, but she grew up in Treaty 8 territory in northern BC. She has been published in Canadian Art, Vice, Prism International, Room Magazine, and other journals. She's currently finishing her forthcoming manuscript, and when she's not writing, Sam can be found hanging out with her cats, Betty and Jughead. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Tansi everyone. So Tansi Sam Natsikasan Dasin Kriko Tsiniamaga Mafami Sigedawako Tsinianan Knanas Komentnawa maskotēw-askiy Squamish-askiy Iguaslelatuth-askiy Knanas Komentnawa Kakya. So sorry, I'm being dive bombed by fruit flies at the worst possible minute that could humanly happen. Thank you. So hi, I'm Sam, the host for this event. I'm very excited, host and curator. I am Cree Métis. My family is from Isle Lacrosse or Sigedawaka, northern Saskatchewan, but I grew up in Treaty 8 territory in northeast BC. I'm currently located on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, where I have been for the last 11 years. And I am very thankful that I get to wake up here, and I'm always working to be in good relation here. So I want to thank the Victoria Festivals of Authors for inviting me to curate this event. I'm very excited. It's been a wonderful time working with you all. And I'm also really excited to host this event. I find hosting on Zoom so weird because I can't see the audience. So I just feel like I'm just doing a monologue to myself in my house. So I just don't know where to look, and I don't know when to stop talking. So that's cool. Yeah, this event was mostly curated out of my own homesickness. Not to make everything about me. And I wanted to invite poets that I am inspired by and that I think their work is beautiful and a reflection of home in a lot of different senses and in a lot of different ways. And so I'm just very excited for Emily, Brandi, and Samantha to share their work with everybody. This event isn't going to be super structured, so we're going to have the poets are going to share some work, like 10 to 15 minutes each, and then we're going to have just a very casual conversation. I have some questions planned, but also everyone's encouraged to ask questions of each other, so it's not going to be like a super formal interview. And I wanted to have it this way because I want it to feel like a conversation between us. And I want it to feel not so stiff. And also I want it to feel just fun. It can be really nerve-wracking to be interviewed, especially in front of an audience. So yeah. Like was said earlier, for attendees, please, if you have any questions that come up and you want to ask the poets or myself, please put them in the Q&A, and I am definitely going to leave time at the end to ask them. So please, you're a part of this conversation as well, and I want you to feel like you can ask things. Obviously, keep it appropriate. I will, there's a moderator, so don't be weird in the questions. Yeah. I normally would like ask for audience feedback right now to be like, how's everyone doing? So I can't do that. It's just me and my cats and my fruit flies. So they are all doing well. In fact, the fruit flies are thriving. So that's cool. I think we're just gonna get into the poets. Why wait? Thank you for some folks who are putting the territory they're on right now in the Q&A. That's really wonderful. Thank you, Leo, for saying you're here and listening. I appreciate that. Yeah, so without further ado, let's go. Take it away, Brandi.
Hi, can everyone see me? Yeah? Oh, I can't see myself, so that's really bizarre. This is gonna be weird. I have boxes here because I'm moving. Um, and this is the only clear space in the house, so I apologize for that, but oh well. I just have a sexy backdrop. I want to say hi to my sister, my sister Danielle. She's my older sister, and she's in Halifax, and she's tuning in today for the first time to see me read, which is so exciting. And I guess I should introduce myself. So I'm a Saulteaux Cree and Métis poet, writer, editor from Treaty 1 territory, which is in Manitoba. I grew up in Winnipeg and Selkirk, Manitoba. I started writing about 5 years ago, and I mainly write poetry, but I'm trying different genres, or attempting to do different genres like fiction and nonfiction. I feel like nonfiction is much more, it's closer to poetry than anything else, and so I'm focused on that at the moment. But I'm writing a second manuscript. I might scrap my first manuscript altogether because I don't like it, and so you can look forward to my first book, which will be my second book probably in the next year or two. All right, I'm going to read you 8 poems. I'm reading off of a screen, so hopefully nothing goes awry. I can't see the chat, so I'll check every now and then to make sure I'm not reading to the void or get kicked out or anything. These 8 poems are, I tried to pick 8 poems about the prairies, which is not hard for me because like all my poems are about the prairies. It's a place I spent 19 years of my life and was sort of chased out of by intergenerational trauma and the foster care system. And it is someplace I hope to return to, even if I go to Edmonton. Like, I'd love to live in Edmonton. I've got a lot of friends in Edmonton now. Oh, and I also am recording from, or streaming from Vancouver, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, or peoples. And this is where I live and learn and go to school. I go to school at UBC on Musqueam territory. So I feel really blessed to be here, even though I am uninvited. So yeah, I'll just start, I guess. Okay. This poem is called All Blue and All Brittle. A girl can fit inside a fist. I was curled up in one like ammonite found on Pine Creek First Nation. In a field of canola, in a graveyard on the res, in a glass bottle, I could be 16 again. Pray my eyes bloodshot, look directly at God or the sun, except I never really believed in anything but my own needs. I want to be held by someone fuller than I am. Hold on to what I have like my mother's hand on my bony jaw. She once raked my mouth open with a bar of ivory soap, and I spat out water from Lake Winnipegosis. I didn't understand enough about the lake to interpret what I'd said. I'm saying anything to anyone now, spun around because every horizon looks the same. They're all blue, and the sky is a bruise that futures my palms. This violence is quiet, has no body except my body, which is to say, I will let the sky silence me. Did I learn anything from my ancestors? Can I twist my mouth open against the clouds? Let me fall and fossilize at the bottom of the lake. Let my body brittle. Let it break off in pieces in other people's hands. Okay, just checking to make sure that I am still live. Okay, this next poem is untitled. I hate titling poems, and it's the last thing I do most of the time, so it's untitled. Name me a love name, a name with feathers picked from sidewalks and bound with twine. Create a body of hollows and let me fill them with glass beads and cigarettes. Name me my father and the story he orates when he's drunk on the balcony. Talk about wisdom, a noble bottle of brandy, etymology of family, Fonsine, Delarond, bird, and rat. Break all family names into pieces and watch them turn into stones I throw into Lake Winnipeg. Watch me turn to stone or a pillar of salt, other words for still, silent, other words for weathering the way we love in this heat when bushfires are too friendly, overfamiliar, and taking the last of the sugar from the pantry. We are nothing if not forgiving. And this poem is for my brother. His name is Tanner. I get permission from my brother to read this poem because it is quite personal, but I feel really grateful to him that he does let me read this poem at readings and perhaps publish it one day. But it's called My Brother Aging in Reverse. If prison is a country, let it break open like a clock on the hour. An escape of green eyes taken like child support, German headed and arguing for the past. Innocence has nothing to do with it. My brother, born at the edge of summer, totters and falls. Our mother screams about paternity from the back of a pickup truck, and I am not there. My brother's face is handsome and young, and he turns 18, and I am not there. The borders of his story are embellished by my voice. I am not invited. Terranellius in this poem, a prison is a border of barbed wire and braided hair. Our sister drives him there. The prairie splits like rubber on a tire, burns in front of our low-income townhouse. The car windows crack in the cold like a wooden bat on the wall, missing my brother's head. Those people, they just wanted to protect us, but we hurt instead. We hurt and try on different clothes, new cities. My brother on his way to visit his father in prison. We don't talk about it. I don't know if he will go. I just know the sweetgrass I gave my sister, tied with orange yarn, resting on her dash for good luck. What happens when you are given what you never had? A gun in the back seat, no seatbelts, 2 a.m. drug run from Kenora. This is a story I don't remember. This is the story I'm told. My brother in the background, a baby. He ages in reverse. His lips split open on new teeth and he looks so old. If his story is a country, I settled there. I was bitten by mosquitoes and brought back this poem. And this poem is for my friend, my really good friend, Selena Bowen. It's after and for Selena Bowen. It's called It Is and It Is. In a dream, there is a field where time has no hands to hold our bodies. We crawl on grass, crystallized to our skin, entering new and old phases of matter. The fast and then dull ache of bones, aging back and forth in our shared time, glitter like clear light over clear water, and I have no words to describe abundance beyond the absence of fear. In a dream is a dream where time is useless, rendered into a strip of scotch tape, keeping flowers pressed in an old book, the words given new meaning under petals and the concept of preservation. Renewal is a beast we have in our hair, braided twice just to get a feel for it. Small teeth and incisors keep falling out of our mouths, always replaced, old and new tools to bite at any sight of an edge to this hour. This field is fenceless and upside down and deep with black soil where we bury ash that smells like the future, ash that smells like the past. Is it medicine, the infinite, the circular, where we both make words out of the same damn world over and over again? I hope so, and I tell you that before we walk home. I tell you that before we are real again. Okay, and this next poem is called The Academy Asks for Context. It was originally a poem after a Liz Howard poem, but it's changed so much that I don't think I can even call it that anymore, although Liz Howard is probably one of my favorite poets ever. So yeah, The Academy Asks for Context. 1. The box of cellophane is on fire. It tips over in the attic and catches on the dresses hanging in my gaze on fire too. That is continuity. This is my line of sight, a touch of the feminine, something I can't hold. I wait for the end of the book where I am turned into a princess when my clothes aren't rags anymore, rages and rages and rages. My mother won't read fast enough for me to get there tonight. 2. Who am I but a collection of every stone thrown in the Red River? Water can put fire out, but skin gets hypothermic when it's burned deep enough. I learned that from my sister. A story is a rock formation I chip away at, try to find my way through. Throw the story in the river, throw myself in the river. My mother would swim there when she was young, but it's too polluted now. It was too polluted then, too, but she didn't care. 3. I call my youth worker a bitch and take my medicine. She does my laundry while I combust on the couch. Some people say you can see my age in my hands, so I wear black gloves, never cut my fingernails, bite them off at night. I tell the shadows I need $15 for cigarettes. They tell me to fuck off, and so I dream I'm smoking on the side of the river, throwing my butts in the water, trying to be closer to her, the mother. 4. I will die on a boat in the river with my father. He has a debt to a medicine man, but my mother doesn't believe in all that. She still makes me smudge the basement when she thinks a ghost lives there, and we walk to the bridge where my future brother will try to throw himself off when he is 16. I am a child, and I will throw myself off the bridge too. It is big and blue, and surely the river would catch me. 5. I have no connection to the stars. I am all fluid and robust, roiling rivers where bodies float or burn depending on the day. My father's boat leaves oil slicks on the surface, and I dip my hands in them, eat oil, get sick. I throw up over the side of the boat and rock to my mother's voice telling me to shut the fuck up while I gag. I did this to myself. I did it to spite you. So I have a few more poems. I realize this is running longer than I thought it would. I might cut one out. Okay, so this next poem is called Count Down as Drunk Mothers after Michael Wasson and Dennis Smith. 10. Somewhere winter. A girl tableau of snow angels, halos added later, made of sticks and tinsel from the dumpster. 9. January blue. Girls play for 12 hours because they can't go home. 8. The snow piles where the plows push it, and girls slide down hills into the sleeping street. 7. Girls' mothers drunk at 9 a.m. 6. Check day, nicotine yellow, lasting until the sun sets. 5. Over the horizon, grab my hand. 4. Cold fingers in the dark, a bottle of Budweiser and a snowball. 3. Drunk mother or child wanting to go home. 2. Low-income townhouses, girls' braids like barbed wire. 1. Girls spitting out baby teeth alone in the snow. 0. A history, a collapse of beer vendors. Okay, let me just see. I have 2 left. I might as well just read them. Okay. This next poem's called Relocation, and it's after Layli Long Soldier. I read a lot of poems after poets, which is probably bad. Maybe I shouldn't tell people they're after poets, but I do anyways. Okay. Relocation. Myself, a church I built with blueprints from the Fellowship of Lower Fort Garry. Ended as a name I've given my body. 1907, a concept, a calendar dredged up from a well in the flood of the century. North is displacement, a forced removal. 169 kilometers up the prairie. An organized body, a body on asphalt, of asphalt and gravel roads. Here is only the sound of footsteps in the rain. All Indians are rivers, live in the river, die there. Their bodies float to Hudson's Bay, get caught as the river freezes, reanimate, talk dirty to each other. Peguis First Nation, a legal land transfer, molted air from the chimney stack that grows out of Selkirk, Manitoba. Anxiety is Summer is a natural gas thermal pump and a little girl beside it in 2002. She sleeps with a knife under her pillow, a screwdriver once her mother hides the knives. Gets her hair cut for $5 at the local barbershop when she gets lice. Relocated in wagons and cars by foot, ticks and armpits and pubic hair, tall grasses, tall grasses. There are telephone poles that link the whole town to the city, to the country. A country grows out of their backs and she has never known the reserve. Permits to leave, her grandmother married on Broken Head First Nation at 13, children after child after children, herself like fresh flint never struck. Great-great-grandma tilled fields, grew carrots, dreamed of owning territory, ownership, owning. Her sons went to war and one came back blind. He dug his hands into the earth. Peg was First Nation and breathed it in until he choked, until the earth filled his lungs. And this last one's a gross one. It's called Vomit Manifesto. And I don't know how to say Rilke's name. I think it's Rilke. I've looked it up many, many times. I just can't say it. He's this German poet who I love. I've loved since I was 16, but I can't say his name correctly. I hope it's correct. Anyways, I mentioned him in the poem, the very first line. Okay, Vomit Manifesto. Memorize Rilke. Translation, every angel is terrifying. I open my mouth and I can't control what comes out of it. Fold my body into Ezekiel wheels, rip it apart, levitate. Collect pelts from roadkill and turn them into sculptures in my own image. The pelts rot and a map of my body erases itself from this page. A flood, a riptide, a nausea. Cliché moves my arms and legs in circles in the water. There, God is there and he vomits bile into the ocean. I feel his pain in my throat and I'm taken by it and made into its animal. What tradition do I replicate, do I reject? I am as confused as you are. Where do I drift to, in whose eyes? Here God floats with me. Why not grab his hand? I swallow salt water, get sick, vomit. In his image, I degrade myself. Make my body unlivable until God disappears too. I'm alone and grow itchy wings and tear them out at the root. I plan to stay terrestrial, accelerated by the earth. Brief, a synonym of pain, every angel is terrifying. Brief turns over in bed and wants me to visit it in its dreams, is a halo over every word I write. Brief says, be not afraid, and I still am. There is power in fear too. I survive that way. Thank you. And now I believe it's my cousin, Samantha Martin-Bird. So excited to hear her read. Yeah, thanks.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Ani, bonjour. Pegues Netonchi and Imkiwekodan Netonchi. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Bird. I'm joining today from the North Shore of Lake Superior in Thunder Bay. It's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation, and it's part of the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory of 1850. So yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so honored that Sam asked me to do this. I just started writing like in January, so it feels really new, but also super fun to be here with Brandi. I was just thinking like one of my first memories of Brandi was when I was 7 and I went out to Selkirk for the first time to like meet the family. And somehow we ended up in the basement with Brandi and their sister Carly, and there were all of these like cardboard boxes, and we were gonna make a fort. And I think I'm like 2 or 3 years younger than Brandi. When you're little, it makes a big difference. So I'm like intimidated by these older cousins, you know. And I remember Brandi said to me like, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but trust me, I know how to make forts. And so I'm really glad to now, many years later, be sharing poetry with Brandi. Super fun for me. So I grew up in Ontario. I grew up in Southern Ontario in Kitchener, but I've kind of moved around a lot. And my family, like we're citizens of Peguis First Nation from Selkirk, Manitoba. But I grew up in Southern Ontario mostly, and then I've been around. And for 3 years, I lived in Regina, Saskatchewan, when I was going to school up there. And so some of these, the poems I'm sharing today are about, time I've spent in the prairies. So I guess I'll get started. This first one is called the Indian Adultery Act. I think this was the first, maybe the second poem that I ever wrote. So I guess, I'll just read it. Maybe I'll explain a little bit about the poem. So the poem is about someone I met that told me that they married their wife because they had 6-1 status, like that. This was a huge motivating factor. But even though they had 6-1 status, They weren't very like culturally Cree or native because they had grown up in Germany. And so this created some like discord in how they connected with each other. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of a background. Okay, the Indian Adultery Act. Bougie Indian with a house in Maui and Miami, sadder than fuck, brags of $30 million deal with the feds. Good for you, sad Indian. Good for those Cree kids who are finally gonna get a school. Bougie Cree, straight from the bush, married a 6'1" Indian raised overseas. I should have married a Cree girl, he laments. His 6'1" was more at home in Munich than Treaty 8. Bougie Indian with big brown eyes, lonely as hell, even now cautions, be sure to marry a 6'1" Indian. Still reckons our sovereign status. Good for you, sad Indian, so sovereign, you sleep next to me. So that's the first one. This next one is, this one's about a friend of mine who, when I met him, didn't really care about being Cree. And I was always trying to like bring him to things like powwows or like cultural things. And he was always kind of like, meh, like, I don't really care about that stuff. And then a couple of years later, he did start to care. And then he ended up marrying someone, a mutual friend. So this poem is about him and about identity, you know, like all native poems. Okay. Come to the powwow, round dance, lodge with me. He shrugs. Grow your hair long, get your name, pray and fast and dream with me. He shifts his eyes. Instead, we take endless road trips, chasing the Sask sun, making our own ceremony. Pack your bags, take one last trip, leave for good with me. He shakes his head. I leave for the lakes, he retreats to the Rockies. We visit in Oskanaka-Asasteki 2 summers later. My feelings buried under bones which are piled. He marries a Munyasqueyo. They take the pipe under the sun. His hair is long now. Her hands are in it. He knows his name now. She can't pronounce it. I return to the lakes, trusting Saskatchewan holds this Nehiao Napio, even if his wife is white. So that's the second one. And okay, so this next poem, it's called Manitoulin. This poem is about the summer that I spent in between living in Toronto and living in Regina. So I spent 2 months living in Manitoulin Island. And this is about someone that I knew during that summer while I was preparing to move to Saskatchewan. Race round the island in a 96 Toyota Tercel. Let his hand graze yours. Google Saskatchewan winter temperatures. Shout stories over the wind from rolled down car windows. Apply for school in Regina. Listen to the otters knock the dock you kiss on at night. Trade your 416 for a 306. Watch his green eyes reflect moonlight, fill with longing. Drive west. Race around the island, then leave him and the lakes for the prairies. Okay, so this next one, so I don't know where I was living at the time, but I was living somewhere, going somewhere else, and I had like a 3-hour layover in Winnipeg. So I told my buddy, I was like, hey, I've got 3 hours from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Come meet me at the airport. We'll get breakfast. We'll catch up. It'll be super fun. And my buddy says to me, yeah, absolutely. I'll meet you there. And so I'm like, yes, the morning is redeemed. So anyways, I land in Winnipeg, turn on my phone, and I get a call from him. And he says, oh, Sam, I actually can't come. My wife is with this. And I was so offended. I was like, as if anything's gonna happen at 6 a.m. at the Winnipeg airport. So then I decided I'm gonna write a poem as if just because I'm annoyed. So this one's called Layovers. Layovers, YWG. 3 hours here in Treaty 1 in Red River Territory in your city. 3 hours to tell stories, visit, drink tea, eat eggs and toast. 3 hours to make plans. Let's write a book. Let's run for office. Join that board. Let's laugh maniacally. Let it echo down the halls of James Armstrong Richardson. Let's catch up on all the gossip, politics, pedagogical theory. Meet me at Stella's. Bring jokes, stories, medicine. Let's talk about everything, save for your wife. So that's that one. Okay, so this next one I wrote just a little while ago. I was feeling all depressed, because of the pandemic. So I decided I'll go back to Saskatchewan. That'll cheer me up. And so I drove to Saskatchewan. I spent about a month there, working remotely, visiting some friends. And I spent a lot of time driving, like a lot of time. And so this poem I started during some of those prairie drives. And if you've ever been to the prairies, highly recommend you drive through it instead of just flying, because it's a totally different experience when you're driving. So this poem is about that, and then it's about returning to Thunder Bay. Siri. Siri says, for the next 374 kilometers, continue straight. Siri says, for the next 10,000 years, continue straight. Siri says, the prairie is an ocean. Siri says, Beesum will set at 9:24 p.m. today. Siri says, wherever you go, there you are. Siri says, Easy Saskatchewan skies overflow. Siri says, in 300 meters, turn left onto the Saskatchewan 22. Siri says, wherever you go, you are burdened with the self. Siri says, it's the valley who calls. Siri says, expect thunderstorms early this afternoon. Siri says, home means easy exhale. Siri says, the mountain belongs to Benesiwak. That's it. So yeah, like a little bit about the prairies and about like Fort Capel, and also about here, like there's a mountain, Mount McCabe, but in the language we call it a Nimkiwaju, which means Thunder Mountain. And it's a place where the Benesiwak, the Thunderbirds, chill. So yeah. Anyways, those are my poems. Thanks for listening. I guess Emily Riddle, you are next. You want to take it away?
Thank you. Yeah, tan sa kagyo, ogima pipiguan squayon and sigasan, kaputaga otsenia, maga ni wigan, amaskotēw-askiy ganik megwat. So my name's Emily Riddle. I'm Nahio on my mom's side and Scottish and Swedish on my dad's side. I'm from the Alexander First Nation, what we call Kaputaga here. I grew up in Edmonton and actually moved back here 2 years ago from Vancouver, from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory, just in time for the pandemic. So Edmonton is part of our greater traditional territory. And actually, my band adhered to Treaty 6 at Fort Edmonton, which is about a 10-minute walk from where I am right now, which is at this current site of the Alberta legislature. Yeah, and the name for Edmonton, I feel like it's always noted as being above the fort, because the name means Beaver Hills Mountain House, but it actually references this like giant beaver dam that spanned the entire North Saskatchewan River at one point. And if you know how wide the North Saskatchewan River is in Edmonton, that's like quite a feat for some beavers to do. That's intense. Yeah, it feels very different doing land acknowledgements on your own territory than on the coast. Yeah, I'm just happy to be here with all of you on Zoom and to be invited. I'm reading all new poems, which makes me nervous because I haven't read them before, and I still feel like I'm working on the endings of some of them. So you are my guinea pigs for this. So the first poem is called Prairie Fruit, and I actually had this translated into Nihiyoewin for a language project that Cheyenne Rain Legrand was curating. That actually just the whole project finished yesterday with a fashion show. And there's, interestingly, in the language, there's no real translation for fruit other than berry, which kind of relates to what the poem is, but it's like a queer play on words that doesn't really work in Cree, which I think is super interesting. But Prairie Fruit. On a flight back from the West Coast, I grieve. There are no aerial shots of the prairies prior to them being cut up like oranges for a kid's soccer game. My dad tells me the only fresh fruit available in Edmonton in his childhood were oranges, apples, and bananas. I am a prairie fruit. Saskatoon, strawberries, blueberries. When Nahio babies have their first, we feast on blueberries to celebrate them, protect them, to be delicious. If we do this again, perhaps the prairies will liberate themselves. Prairie fruit will reign again, reign again. This is a very angsty poem called Revitalize Me, and it was also translated into the language, which is wild because I got to hear what a speaker would think the words gentrify and things like that are. I'm learning the language, but I definitely do not have that capacity to translate to that extent. So that was super interesting. So Revitalize Me. I live in downtown Edmonton. This means I'm part of the revitalization of the downtown core. It's possible to gentrify on your own land. I often get mail that says stuff like, "Dear neighbor, please read the following update about the Rossdale power plant development." This power plant, which has been decommissioned, was built on top of a traditional burial ground in 1902, one that contains my relatives' remains. 1902 is 26 years after this land became Treaty 6 territory, 3 years before Alberta became a province, 28 years before the Natural Resource Transfer Act. This place is called a burial ground rather than a cemetery because the word cemetery has legal implications, which would make it more difficult to build a gondola or some Granville Island-esque market or some other bullshit. A private company is doing historical tours of the plant. I commented on their Facebook page, "The people whose ancestors are buried under the power plant get free tours." They respond with, "What a great idea, send us a DM." The power plant was fueled by coal mined from the banks of the river. Maybe I'm just recovering from too much Western political theory, but there's probably a lot to be said about the transformation of coal into energy that displaced one sovereign power for another. I am sure that the administrative assistant who puts these notice envelopes in the mail is unaware that they are sending FYI notices about the desecration of the recipient's family graves, which is a particularly sharp act of violence. I would define violence as the transgression of natural law. I would define whiteness as the annihilation of natural law from one's collective being. Sometimes being Nahio means only being able to feel one hurt at a time in order to preserve one's bodily integrity as a four-bodied being. That's one that it's working on the ending. I keep like cutting more and more from the ending, unable to figure out exactly how it ends, but TBD. This one is called How to Overthrow Canada via Infographic. And it has, if you've watched Sex and the City, you'll like understand the ending, and in the text, it has an actual footnote. So, Prince Philip died, and I wish I could celebrate, but my teachings don't allow me to find joy in the death of an old man. The Treaty 6 Confederacy sends condolences to the Queen on the passing of her husband, as one should do when your mother's husband dies. I eat a pint of ice cream with the acknowledgement that I will never live to be 99 for factors beyond my control. The Queen seems immortal while my Indian friend groups face tragedy. Despite experiencing an ongoing genocide, we have a healthier relationship to death. The Queen sends my chief a pastel pantsuit that matches one of hers. He is supposed to receive a new outfit every 3 years as per our treaty. Inside the package, letter reads, "I'm sorry, I can't, don't hate me." So if you watch Sex and the City, you know that Berger, who's this like flaky author, breaks up with Carrie via a Post-it note, and it says that on 3 separate lines, "I'm sorry, I can't, don't hate me." This is like the whole premise of an entire episode. I think I'm aging myself by revealing I watched this whole series. The next one is actually an older poem that I wrote about dating in Vancouver and a particular breakup. And I had this like one fall where my mom got cancer and like 2 of my grandparents died, and my boyfriend broke up with me in like a 2-week span. And I feel like half of my book came from those 2 weeks. To be honest, I'm broken up. Split ends with split ends. Open the cupboard and take out the no-name coconut oil. Pry the fridge door open to check how far gone the eggs are. You have changed from the type of person who throws out food on the exact expiry date to one who inspects it, assumes it's probably okay, if not green, runny, smelly. I am bisexual and I'm not sure I want to do this. Mix both in place in hair, trying not to get raw egg all over your face. Wrap hair in one of those plastic grocery bags you felt guilty for taking. You have so many tote bags in your front closet awaiting use. Sit down and turn on some mindless Netflix show. You miss the days of renting a movie and committing to the cause. Swipe left on every single polyamorous person on Vancouver Tinder. Some Nahiawak have truly majestic hair, but majestic is a high bar for anyone now. So it's hard not to believe your damaged ends are some sort of moral failing. The egg is apparently reducing protein loss. There is debate on whether or not the coconut oil particles are small enough to permeate your hair. Regardless, this ritual feels productive. Go on dates with people who go home and Google Plains Cree. Rinse out this mask in a cold shower, trying to make sure your hair is not scrambled eggs and split ends, just split ends and split ends. In the case of hair, you cannot mend what is already broken. Chop off your dry ends and become a new person. This is probably my most recent poem that I've written. And it's another angsty poem, but I'll promise I'll leave you off like somewhat hopeful. And it's about magpie. So the word in Cree that we have for magpies is apishagaga-gisak. And even though lots of people think they're really annoying, there's like lots of ceremonial songs dedicated to them. And this is kind of about my relationship to them and to dating white women who don't understand their significance. Early in our relationship, you tell me the apishagaga-gisak outside your attic bedroom window are annoying. I realize quickly that I am both more careful in cutting with my words than you. I tell you apishagaga-gisak are bothersome because most of sak left. Left is a casual word for what really happened. Apishagaga-gisak have intergenerational trauma because most of sak were brutally murdered. They no longer follow massive herds to eat bugs off their backs in a mutualistic manner. They've been bemoan this new reality and their squawking is the register of their displeasure. Just like me, apishagaga-gisak awkwardly remain. I too wake up in the morning and languish. Languish is a suitable word for what happened. During the second summer of the pandemic, we had been broken up for 6 months, and I am on the road back from the other side of Treaty 6. As we pass Elk Island Park, Nokom says, as long as there are buffalo, there will be Cree people. As long as there are Cree people, there will be buffalo. I want to believe apishagaga-gisak, Mostosak, and I will drink an iced tea on a porch together, make light of all that has transpired, talk about the women that we have loved. I'm looking at the time. Oh, I'm okay. I have one called Kiwai Itwe Joy, and in my kind of language learning journey, this was a really important phrase to learn because Kiwai Itwe means how do you say? So how do you say joy? And it's makes sense more in the context of my book that I talk about. It's kind of like breaking the third wall a bit that way. I wish this book was just about Cree joy, but there are so many things preventing that timeline. So I write it as much as I can, even if it's a fantasy. On the way back to the barbecue on a house just off Commercial Drive, I asked what kind of burgers you want me to bring, and you remind me you can't eat bison because it's your clan. The delicate balance of Cree joy requires CBD gummies, Metamucil, probiotics, osteopathy, praise. On the way to the golf course on stolen Enoch Cree Nation land, we blast Billy Talent and talk about how we can never live without the vastness of the homelands again. The delicate balance of Cree joy requires regular Indian Mario Kart nights, 8 glasses of water a day, a week without microaggressions. On the way to McDonald's in your Jeep, we talk about disappointing white lovers, how we ultimately believe so deeply in our ability to romantically flourish. The delicate balance of Cree joy requires Dr. Pepper Slurpees, REM sleep, a bowl of vegetables, lactate, a night out dancing. On the way to our regular park spot where we drink iced oat milk lattes, I pick you up and we both remark on each other's new outfits and new beadwork. A delicate balance of Cree joy requires pep talks from your mom, new poetry books, no disciplinary obligation to be joyful. And this is my last poem. And in the Nihio like understanding of color, there's like big prayer that relates to all these colors. So a section of my poetry manuscript is going through all these colors, which is the regular rainbow, except for we have an additional light blue. So I'm going to read the one for just blue, not light blue, to finish off. So I sow blue plants blue ribbons onto pants and think of Maggie Nelson, Gatorade, desire versus yearning, but also about the universe, knowing me as a sky being, and how to sum the big horizon is unnerving, whereas I secretly hope it devours me. And in this way, I am closest to blue. So I thank you for listening.
I think we're all unmuted. Yes. I have no idea what everyone else can see, but thank you all so much for your wonderful readings. It was so good to hear you and or Emily and Brandi, you guys read again. And it was so amazing to hear you read for the first time, Sam. I really loved your energy. It was so good. So thank you. There's some really good questions coming in the Q&A, and we'll get to those later. But again, to the audience, if you have questions you want to ask the poets, please put them in the Q&A and we'll try and get to them at the end of the event. How's everyone feeling? How you all doing? Good? Good?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So I have a few questions written. We have about 45 minutes. We'll probably try and leave like, oh good, people said that we can see all four of us. Try and leave at least like 10 or 15 at the end for audience Q&A. So I don't have any questions that are going to like pinpoint you individually. So it's all the questions are all play. So the first question I have for you is just who are your influences? Who do you write from and who do you write for? So can anyone who wants to go first?
I can go first. So my biggest influence, well, I started writing poetry because I read Infinite Citizen of the Shaking Tent by Liz Howard. I wrote my first poem after reading that book, or no, my second poem after reading that book. My first poem I wrote after going to a poetry reading where there's all white poets, and I was like, oh, I could probably do this too. So I tried, and I did, and I am. And but like that book was like, oh, this is an interesting kind of like indigenous poetry. It's not indigenous poetry in the way that I've like conceptualized it, and yet it is. And it's like breaking new ground. And so that has been she's been a huge inspiration to me. In fact, like she's why I write poetry. And then there's like the big indigenous poets that I love and everyone loves. There's like Blair Belcourt, Joshua Whitehead. Oh my god, my head is just going blank right now. I'm inspired by my friends too, like Selena Bowen and Jessica Johns and Jay Simpson and Sam, you and other Sam cousin and Emily. I got to like edit Emily's like a manuscript, and it was just like, so I'm so excited for it. And like yeah, so I'm inspired by that. And like who I write for other indigenous people, and obviously I write for my family and I write for myself. And I'm also working on a book about like disability poetics, or like trying to create a disability poetic ethic for indigenous people, which is something I haven't really seen in a creative work before. So I'm really excited about it, and also like have to figure out what I'm even trying to say first. So I have like 12 pages of a book. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, that's my answer.
That's so cool. I'm really excited to read that. Sam, Emily. I also love the differentiation between me, Sam, and Sam Martin-Bird as Sam and cousin Sam.
Friend Sam, cousin Sam.
Yeah, I feel like similar ones. It's hard. Yeah, I feel like we're in a community of really good poets. It's hard, like obviously all of our friends and everyone on the panel. Selena Bone, who I think's watching. Morgan Parker and some other like poets too. I've been reading lots of Morgan Parker. I feel like I came to poetry accidentally, or like to heal from policy writing. And so poetry is like something that I can write for other Indigenous people, and then I feel like I don't try and make legible, which is like very different than writing like an op-ed or something else like that. So I think like inspired by lots of genres, and I write prose poems, which is controversial, so I'm inspired by other like essayists that too. And like I don't know, like our language too, and the way that it works is like very artistic and inspiring too, thinking through how words work in the language and that sort of stuff.
There's nothing wrong with prose poems.
Just lay that out there.
I'll just like put it out there. I have a couple in my manuscript, so I'll fight for prose poems. Sam, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember or think about like how I'm into writing. I think like I feel like embarrassed to admit this, but I feel like it started by reading like basic white girl poetry, like very like simple heartbreak poetry. And then after reading that for a while, I was like, you know what, maybe I should read something slightly more serious. And probably the biggest Indigenous influence has been Leanne Simpson. Like I've read Islands of Decolonial Love and This Accident of Being Lost like multiple times. Probably two of the few books that I've ever read like more than once. And so I would say those have been huge influences. And then I think also just like being out on the land, like whenever I go for a walk or go canoeing, that's where I felt, or driving, that's where I feel like the beginning of poems like start to come. So I'd say the land is a huge influence. I think actually the first poem that I wrote like this past winter, I was driving back from Southern Ontario. I spent Christmas in Southern Ontario with my family, and I was coming back driving, and there's this place in between the Sioux and Thunder Bay called Old Woman Bay. And so I was driving back to Thunder Bay, and I was feeling a little depressed. I was like, why do I live in Thunder Bay? Why did I choose this life? And like I have no family there, you know. And so I was like, what am I doing with my life? And then I always stop at Old Woman Bay because it's this beautiful like scenic outlook like just off the highway. And I went out there and it was just stunning. And then I remembered, I was like, oh yeah, because I love it here and because the territory here is so beautiful. And that's where my poem Kiwetinook started. Just thinking about what it means to go home, and to go home and to go to the north it's the same phrase in Anishinaabe. So yeah, that's kind of, I'd say the land, Ruby Core, you know, Leanne Simpson. Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I was a big Sylvia Plath fan as a teen, which no one who knows me is going to be surprised.
Me too.
I get it. This is actually a really good segue. I really wanted to talk about place. And I was really, the concept behind this entire panel and reading was about place, right? And so I was really wanting to know, what does place mean for you in your work? And how does place impact your work or influence your work? Yeah.
I could start. I'd say for me, like one of the biggest things I think about when it comes to place is language. So some of these poems, like one of them takes place in Alberta, one is Saskatchewan, one is Manitoba. So I had all three prairie provinces. I don't know if you guys noticed, but and so like the language that I've learned since I was like 18, like in university, since Anishinaabe like Oji Cree specifically, which comes from Northwestern Ontario. But because these when the poem takes place in the prairies, and I feel like I should be using more Cree. So that's what I try to weave in Cree if it is taking place in Cree territory. And so other poems that I have, so for instance, like the Siri poem. So when the poem is still in Saskatchewan, I use Cree, like Kizi Saskatchewan and Bizim. But then when the poem returns to Thunder Bay, I switch to Ojibwe. and say B'nai Siwak, which is, it's very similar to the Cree, but it's different. So I'd say I try to be specific with the language. And I try to use other markers too to make it very specific to place. Like at the Indian Adultery Act one, like there's specific references to like Munich Treaty 8. There's very specific references in the Regina poem to the city of Regina, in Cree and in English. For me, like it's important to be specific because it's about those men as much as it is about those places. Yeah, those are some of my thoughts on place.
I really loved it. I really love the tying of language and place and that switch when you're going through different territories in your poems. That's really amazing.
Thanks.
Fruit flies. Sorry, guys.
I have them too. They've been attacking me. Like, and during my reading, I was like trying to get them away from me. Oh my God, they're so bad in Vancouver right now. And like for me, I would say that place, I'm always chasing some idealized version of the prairies in my work, simply because I can't be there right now. And because it was a source of a lot of trauma for me. Like the land is very rife with that kind of trauma, and like it's like not to say it's the land's fault, but it is it is it is unavoidable to be like activated by those lands when I'm there. Like things, I haven't been back to the prairies since a funeral actually. I always seem to have to go back for funerals, and so it's not something that's easy. And for me, I'm writing about the body more and more, and so I think about the body as a landscape and as a place that we inhabit and where it's taken me. And I think that is kind of an exercise I'm undertaking right now, because the body is connected to the land, and right now I'm not on my territory. So what does that mean to be displaced, but also pushing out someone else? Like I'm moving to Burnaby from Vancouver and displacing someone else, essentially one of the people from the host nations. And like I haven't lived on my territory for 10 years now, so what does that mean even? I was in Montreal before this, which is Mohawk territory. So yeah, it's a big mess that I'm trying to untangle.
I understand that. Also being on the coast and away from home, it's yeah. Do you have anything you'd like to add, Emily?
Yeah, I think because I'm the one on the prairies, hey?
That's you.
Right now, I'm supposed to speak for them. Yeah, I moved back 2 years ago. I feel like my poetry manuscript is like very Edmonton, although there's this like chunks about living on the coast. I was trying to think if there was anything about traveling, but maybe like only traveling to Saskatchewan, my real exotic travel. But yeah, I don't know if I would have written this book if I didn't move home. I feel like a lot of it is about getting reoriented to living here, and what that means, and kind of confronting the violence of being here, because I mean, living in Alberta is interesting right now, particularly with our provincial government, and I feel like more spiritually well here, and part of that is my mom living here and my family and being close to them, but also just feel like well living on my own territory, which I know is in some ways a privilege, and not everyone feels that way on the prairies. But also realizing that things like if I'm dating someone who's a woman, I'm not holding their hand, or there's an anti-vaxxer protest like 10 minutes away from my house every Saturday, so I plan where I'm gonna walk according to things like that. So learning about, and just like our history being completely written over, of like knowing where sacred sites are in the city, or writing about my ancestors being buried and people building a gondola over it. So confronting like that beautiful knowledge of what our territory is and how much I love it, and then also like all those specific violences that happen here that are some of them prairie specific to like the people that have settled on our territory and who choose to continue to be shitty.
Yeah, I think it's like the hyper visibility in the prairies. Like here, people don't ping me as being native a lot of the time. Um, and so like when I go to Winnipeg, I feel at once at ease, and at other times totally like, oh, this I forgot what this felt like. Like I forgot that I am visible here.
Mm-hmm.
And so and like that's both a good and a bad thing, and it can be a violence, but it can also be a source of really great joy. And I think that that's not often talked about in the context of the prairies.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I feel like especially there on the coast, there's the idea that the prairies are kind of just done. Like there's no need. There's just like a wasteland that's full of rednecks and racists. Like there's no need. And you're just like, I feel like I get really frustrated when I'm just like, you don't understand the nuance. You don't get to talk about people's homelands like that. And like, you don't know because you've never had to live the tension.
Mm-hmm. I also think like cities like Winnipeg or Saskatoon or Edmonton, like the majority of Native people that live here are from the prairies, and that really colors like how Indigenous community works. Like whereas in Vancouver or Toronto, like it's a big mixed bag about where people are from. So it's really like freaking Cree women that like run all the shit in Edmonton. It really changes how things, I don't know, appear and work and like processes that are around.
This does also lead into my next question. These are all, you're all doing a really great job of just leading into the questions very naturally. My next question has to do about language. I had a similar conversation for Victoria Festival of Authors with Selena Bowen. When was that? That was on Thursday. Yes. The week has just melded into one mess. It's been a big week. But Selena and I had this really wonderful conversation about how both of us as writers are, and also Cree language learners, how that influences our work and how sometimes language can be freeing and also constraining, depending on what you want to communicate and how you can communicate. And I was wondering if in your work, have you ever felt constrained by language, be it English or not knowing how to express yourself in the language you want?
I feel like I tried to express myself in Soto. It's my dad's first language. It's my dad speaks it. And I gave up. It's hard, man. My dad was trying to teach me it the other day. Like he just called me, he FaceTimed me, and he was like, I showed him this book my partner got for me. It was called Beginner Soto, and he was like, "Oh, we can just begin now." And he's a bad teacher, and he was getting mad at me. He's like, "You're messing me up," and I was like, "Well, I don't know." Like, he's a bad teacher, but like I love him anyways. And like it was cool to grow up. Like I didn't grow up with my dad, but I grew up around that family, his family, like our family, the Delaron family, and they would just speak Soto in front of me, and like I never really got to learn it, but I did get to hear it all the time, or whenever I was with my dad or my grandparents, my cuckoo, and I'm really like that. Those memories are really special to me, and I cherish them because like not every Indigenous person gets access to their language, even if they don't understand it. And I think it's so cool. And I do feel constrained by English in that it's a technology. Like I went to a class that was taught by Kava Akbar, and he was talking about technology, English being a technology, like the first technology that was given to Indigenous peoples by like colonial settlers, and that it's a destructive technology, which I thought was really interesting because it's also the only way anyways, can communicate, and that's by design. So, yeah, I love language. I love writing. And one day I hope to learn my language, but until then, I would have to find more and more creative ways to use English. And I do that in my poetry, by increasingly trying to play with form, trying to create new ways of saying the things I want to say. Like every time I find a metaphor or like a turn of phrase that I think is new, I'm like, oh, this feels really good, and that's why I keep doing it. So yeah.
Awesome. I think you do such a good job with it as well. I think your poetry, what I love so much about your poetry, and I'm really like trying not to be too gushy about all your guys' poetry because like we'll be here for hours if I start. But what I really love about your poetry, Brandi, is that like you do paint such beautiful pictures. And I find that English, I don't love English, but I love when people can create beautiful things with English, and I think you do a really good job with that. Anything anyone else?
Thank you, by the way. Sorry, I was interrupted by fruit flies too, and I was like, I lost.
There's something on my eyelash, and I don't know if it's like a fly or not, and I'm just like, they're just like a fly crawling on my eye in the Zoom.
I can't see it. I don't know, like I kind of feel a duality around it, in that I kind of mourn that I can like maneuver in English like quite well, and like that I can't do that in my own language. Like it's still awkward. I can understand when people are carrying on a conversation in my learning and like participate a little bit. But yeah, it's kind of that mourning that English is so much easier to maneuver than and like express my feelings in, even though I know that like Nihiyoiwen's so much funnier and it's like easier to write about gender, and it's easier to write about relationships when people talk about it too. There's just like more nuance there, and it's less like a business transaction language like English. I feel like I'm really careful. I don't want to tokenize the words that I use in the language in my poems. So I really specifically usually use them when there's not a good translation, or if it's a location, I usually try and write the location. Or if it's Shigagagi Sak, like I include their name or people's names and things like that. So yeah, I never want to be like tokenizing of just including Cree words for the sake of it. It's usually like a feeling, or they're not being a substitute, instead of just like something that there's a like quite easy direct translation. Yeah, I feel like I don't know, language makes me feel sad lately, because if I feel like if I didn't have a full-time job, I'd be able to dedicate more time to the learning. And even though I worked for a bunch of BC First Nations designing immersion degrees, and while language speakers like rapidly died, like communities with a dialect would have like 6 people left, and the BC government like would not fund the program that year, and then it's like half those language speakers are dying. But we have a lot of speakers of Nihiyoiwen, but I am afraid that in 30 years we'll be in a similar position because we're not creating speakers. And so sometimes, yeah, and it makes me sad or scared that that our language is leaving. Not to be a huge bummer, but I also find a lot of like inspiration in learning syllabics and spending time. I work for Edmonton Public Library, and our elder in residence is Joanne Saddleback, and her husband Jerry knows the full like origin of Cree syllabics, which takes like 4 days to tell. And so I found a lot of inspiration in that particular story for like writing and visual art too. And like there is like cultural processes in order to like write about those things too. So that's kind of woven throughout my manuscript. I don't know if I read that many poems that are particularly about language today, unfortunately.
I feel like I really like tokenize. I used to tokenize Soto a lot in my early work, and it was because I was trying to learn the language and I didn't really know how to express that in my own poetry. And then I sort of just like was like, oh, I give up trying to learn this language right now, and there'll be time for it later. And then I did some thinking, and like what you say is really like apt for like how I want to use the language going forward. And I think I have to adjust like how I want to conceptualize of my own language and like figure out like what I'm comfortable sharing, So yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm. Do you have any thoughts, Sam?
Yeah, I'm really struck by your comment, Emily, about like not using the language in a like tokenistic way, but with a lot of purpose. And so
Uh-oh.
No.
Uh-oh.
Oh no.
Oh no, I really wanted to hear what she had to say.
Me too.
Uh-oh.
Say uh-oh over and over again.
Hold on, I'm just seeing if I can.
It's a good frozen position, though.
It's like I've never seen someone freeze so well.
The power pose.
Yeah.
I'm just does anyone have anything they want to say while I try it? Anyone want to take over hosting for me? Oh, okay. She'll be
Her
back.
comeback.
Okay, that sounds good.
But yeah, just in the meantime, before Sam gets back, yeah, what you're saying about tokenizing language, and how, Brandi, you're saying that you did that early in your work too. I did too. I definitely would just like try and use Cree in ways that didn't feel natural or good. And I'm like, this is so awkward. This is so unbelievably awkward.
I don't use those poems anymore. They're gone.
Yeah.
They're dead and buried.
Yeah. Oh, I got it. Oh, those. Yeah. We're gonna talk about that a little bit later. You're back, Sam.
I'm back. I don't know what happened. It just cut out. Am I still? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just saying I was really struck by what Emily was sharing about not using language in like tokenistic ways. And so then I was thinking about like, okay, yeah, what does it mean to use the language with purpose? Because part of me feels like the languages are so beautiful. And so the more Korean or Ojibwe that you can stuff in a poem, the better. But I think there is a lot to be said about being really intentional about which words we use in the language. And so I was just reflecting on some of my poems about how I use it. And I really like to use the language in ways that are like play on words. And so I have a poem called Kiwe, and the root of Kiwe is kiwe, which is the verb to go home, and Kiwe with a locative ending, then it means the north. And so in that poem, like I talk about the north, and I also include the phrase like in the imperative Bikiwin, which means come home. And so like I'm intentionally playing with the idea of traveling north as being about going home. And then I was just thinking also like in the poem that I shared, the Siri poem, like there's a line that says like Kizis Saskatchewan skies overflow, which I wrote because like the Kizis Saskatchewan means like the place where the rivers flow swiftly. And so the word being about the rivers, but then turning that on like not just the rivers overflowing, but the skies are overflowing. And then there's a line in there, it's the third stanza where I talk about like driving on the Saskatchewan 22, because I was driving from George Gordon's First Nation down to Fort Capel into India, and then I ran out of gas. It was a big mess, but anyway, so I was driving on the Saskatchewan 22 and thinking about Fort Capel, which in French means who calls, but it comes from the Cree, which I don't know how to say, which means who calls, about something call. So the line is, it's the Bally who calls, which is a reference to what's happening in Cree and in French. And And then there's another line like the mountain belongs to Benesiwak, about how, yeah, like I was sharing, like the mountain itself is called Thunder Mountain, the Nimkiwaju, and Animki or Benesiwak, like both words for the Thunderbirds. So I like doing it when there's like fun play on words that I'm sure like maybe 2 people get unless I explain it. But I have a lot of fun with it. There's another one too, like in the Regina poem, I write like, we visit in Oskanaka Sasteki. So Oskanaka Sasteki means place where like pile of bones, because for those who don't know, like the history of Regina is like the place where they slaughtered buffalo to like starve us out. And so that's the name for Regina in Cree. And then there's a reference in the next stanza about my feelings being buried under bones. And so, yeah, anyways, I like to do it in like cute, like play on words ways.
I
So,
love listening to you talk about language or reading you talk about language, because you had a blog for, I think, last Easter. Was it last Easter?
mhm.
Yeah, that you where you like you used Ojibwe and like broke down like the stories around Easter relating to the
Mhm.
language, and which was really interesting, and things I hadn't known or learned before, and like really put a context for language, which I love when that happens, when it's not just like rote teaching, but there's story involved. Which I think is
Mhm.
how language should be taught. So
Mhm. Yeah, what Brandy's referencing, like for like a Lent practice, I decided to read, there's just this one story in Genesis about, anyways, it's a short story, but I read it in the Ojibwe Bible, and then I like studied it for a month trying to understand all the words and understand like how is the story different when read in Ojibwe, which was very fun if you're into that very sort of niche experience of the language. Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, I could ask you, I didn't realize I actually wrote so many questions down, but I think we should switch over to Q&A. I want to pick all these questions that are in the Q&A. So thank you so much to the audience for being so open and brave asking questions. I know it can be kind of nerve-wracking, but we can't get to them all. So I'm sorry. The first one I want to ask is actually specifically for Brandi, and I think everyone can jump in. And Nicole asks, for Brandi, I am curious by your thought that poetry is similar to nonfiction. I agree. I also feel that there is really no fiction. Everything we write is based on nonfiction events, feelings, opinions, etc. Do you have any further thoughts on this?
Well, the reason I believe that poetry and nonfiction are connected in a very intimate way is because it's like all about ordering the world and bringing order to the world in a world that doesn't have order. And poetry is so precise, and um, good nonfiction, anyways, I believe should be precise as well in another kind of way, which is like being precise in what it's trying to say and knowing what it's trying to say. Like, I'm not good at this yet. I am a baby nonfiction writer. Um, but I love experimenting with it. And I don't necessarily agree that there is no fiction, because how can I formulate this thought I'm trying to just create out of my ass? I don't believe there's not any, like, there's no fiction, because um, maybe I can see your point about we use it, like stories are used to like form the world and see how we see the world, but like I don't like, if we don't have if we don't have fiction to fall back on, then like it's harder to take risks, I think. And like one of my nonfiction teachers told me, like Kevin Chong, he told me at UBC that fiction writers always get accused of writing from their lives, and nonfiction writers get accused of lying. And so it's like this weird dance that you have to take. Whereas like if I wrote a fiction piece about a gay native teen who grew horns because he was depressed. And like, of course that was from my own life, but I never grew horns. And I love being able to write about people growing horns. And so I think that's a really interesting thought, but I don't necessarily agree.
Thank you. Emily or Sam, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I could. I love this question because yeah, Brandi, when you were sharing, yeah, about nonfiction and poetry being similar, I was like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, but it really resonated. Because yeah, a lot of my poems I think are about, yeah, they're close to nonfiction a little bit. But I think it's also fun because you can change them and make them more fictional if you want to. Like I was just thinking a few weeks ago, or a few months ago now, I wrote this poem. It's called Chiman, which means canoe. Which now I'm wondering if it should be in Ojibwe or English anyway. So, but it was just about this Tinder guy I went on like 3 dates with, and like nothing happened. He was like a hardcore conservative, but yeah, like I don't know what I was doing. So the poem is about like canoeing with him, and then it concludes with like this line about him like filling my canoe. And he messaged me after I posted it, and he's like, Sam, I love this poem, but also, aren't your friends gonna think I filled your canoe? And I was like, yeah, but we know it didn't happen. But I just felt like it would be anticlimactic to end the poem without it, you know? So, yeah, so sometimes there's fiction.
Love that. I'm dying. Perfect. The next question is a bit of a bigger question, but it's from Sarah. And then she says, as Indigenous poets, do you ever feel pressure from friends, family, general public, yourself to write more about certain topics relating to Indigenous identity? Is there ever a self-induced sort of guilt when your poems don't necessarily explicitly address your Indigenous identity? I'm asking this because it also matches up with the question I was going to ask about how you feel about Indigenous poetry as a category.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find it confining or freeing?
I can start.
Sure.
I think when this question makes me think about one of the early questions about like who are some of our influences, and I forgot to say for sure like Tennille Campbell's work, like both her books, and I think like reading her books like gave me like I felt like after reading them like I could give myself permission to write about men. And so I really appreciate that about her stuff, and I don't think I really feel any pressure to write about anything in a particular way because I just want to write about my own experiences. And so they're going to be kind of political and native just by nature of I'm just talking happened. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I find the category of Indigenous poetry confining because there is an expectation that you will write about identity. At least in my experience, and people want you to perform trauma, and like I do perform trauma, but I don't want to be like I really wish I didn't have to perform trauma in this very specific way that is consumed in a very specific way, because no matter what, it could be like say about like foster care or like intergenerational trauma, or it could be about like being sick, or like having a chronic illness, or that doesn't involve anything to do with like my Indigenous identity, but it'll still be read through that way. So it's sort of like a box we're all put in on whether we want it or not.
Mhm.
And that's why I really appreciated Liz Howard's work, because it was like so fucking weird and great, and um like referenced like all kinds of canons, like from like I think German philosophy to like Indigenous stories told by white people, like the Hiawatha, the Song of Hiawatha, I believe it's called, and also just like our own stories, like the shaking tent ceremony, and I really love that, and I want to emulate that in some way, because I feel like we like hold so many stories, and they shouldn't be all read the same way, and I think that isn't our responsibility anymore. I'm not gonna worry about whether or not I'm performing trauma in a specific way anymore, because that's for the reader to untangle, I think.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Emily, do you have anything you want to add?
I feel pretty free in poetry when I'm actually writing it. Like I don't have to perform anything. But yeah, I think that I agree with Brandi that the category of Indigenous poetry can be confining, and people definitely want Indigenous poets to write certain things. I was thinking through like the last poem that I read, like Blue, is actually like about my Indian name and like is probably the most like culturally connected poem in the manuscript. But like if white people are reading it, like they would not read it like that at all. And so a lot of those color poems, like there's nothing like perceivably native about any of them, but they're actually influenced by this like specific prayer. So I think there's like tidbits that other Cree people would get, but are not really for anyone else. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, and I wish we could keep on talking forever. But before we go, I want to just ask everybody, what do you have coming up? Do you have any work coming up? Anything you want to talk about? Do you want to plug something? Anyone? You're all doing exciting things. Come on.
Emily, go first. You haven't gone first yet.
Yeah. I'm just finishing up a writer's trust mentorship with Josh Whitehead for my poetry manuscript. So it's getting sent off, which is really exciting. And I'm happy to like break up poetry for a while and work on other things, to be honest. So that manuscript is forthcoming. What else? That's pretty much it. I'm working on a novel about time travel. It's about my ancestor Louise Umperville, who was married to the chief actor of Fort Edmonton, and her time traveling, and that too, and like a few different projects. So happy to break up with poetry for a while and work on those things that are forthcoming. And more visual art. I started doing visual art over the pandemic. Like I'm really losing it. So that's the direction we went.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Sam or Brandi?
I mean, I don't really have anything like that going on. But I am doing a reading, I guess. I don't know if anyone here in this Zoom session is in Thunder Bay, but I'm doing a poetry reading with Evan J at the end of the month at the Thunder Bay Art Gallery. So should look out for that. If you're in Thunder Bay, I don't know if any of you guys are. And then I have a little poem coming out in the upcoming issue of CB2. The CB2 like theme is like, it's called the Daddy issue. I told my buddy about it and he was like, literally helping to write the book on daddy issues. So proud of you. Anyways, there's a really cute little poem that's coming out in CB2. So
amazing. That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Brandi?
So I was working on a manuscript and I scrapped like 20 pages of it. I hate it. It's like coming of age Indigenous poetry, and I'm tired of that, writing that for myself. So I'm, like I said before, I'm writing a book on trying to create a disability ethic of care for Indigenous people through poetry, which is a very lofty idea, but I'm gonna try. And also, I'm trying to work on an essay for my class in creative nonfiction about the romanticization of suffering in teen girls and about teen girls and for teen girls. I'm like going to be referencing like White Oleander by Janet Fitch and Wasted by Maria Hornbecker, some Sylvia Plath, probably, and just writing about it because I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, and it really helped me survive as a teenager. And so I'm really excited to start that. I'm listening to the audiobook right now of White Oleander. It's narrated by Oprah.
What?
Yeah, it's narrated by Oprah.
That is bananas. Wow. This has been amazing. Thank you three so much for agreeing to do this reading and panel and having this conversation with me. Sam, it was so nice to meet you on Zoom.
Wow, nice to meet you too.
Yes. Emily and Brandi, I hope we get to see each other soon at some point. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to Victoria Festival of Authors for inviting me to curate, and thank you for everyone who tuned in. I hope everybody has a good rest of their Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, miigwech. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you to everybody who attended the panels and to the authors Brandi Bird, Samantha Martin-Bird, and Emily Riddle. If you are interested in purchasing any of the books featured during the festival, please support festival sponsor and VFA bookseller Munro's Books by visiting the store in person or online at munrosbooks.com. There are still more events to attend for this festival, so please visit our website, victoriafestivalofauthors.ca, to view our festival program. This year, all festival events are available to watch online. Our website also features Q&As with all the authors participating in VFA 2021 and a place to sign up for our newsletter. You can also support the festival by following us on Facebook and Twitter and encouraging your friends to attend one of our upcoming events. You may also wish to make a tax-deductible donation to Victoria Festival of Authors through our website or on VFA's page at Canada Helps. Your donations help keep VFA an engaging, accessible, and sustainable festival. We hope to see you at our next virtual event, In Conversation, Andre Alexis with Hal Wake this afternoon at 3:30 Pacific. Thanks again for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day.